The annual Patterson family reunion was always held at Uncle Rick's sprawling lakeside mansion in upstate New York. Every August, 3 generations of Pattersons would gather for a weekend of barbecues, boat rides, and the inevitable competitions that seemed to define our family dynamics. This year was no different, except that I'd been dreading it more than usual. I'd been working for the federal government for 8 years now, ever since graduating from Georgetown with degrees in finance and cybersecurity. What my family didn't understand, what I'd deliberately kept vague, was the nature of my actual work. When they asked, I simply said I worked for a government agency, doing financial investigations. It was technically true. I just left out the part about being a senior special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, specializing in money laundering, tax evasion, and white-collar criminal enterprises. The secrecy wasn't just about privacy. It was about survival in a family where success was measured in dollar signs and social status, and where Uncle Rick had appointed himself the ultimate authority on both. Rick Patterson had built a construction empire over 30 years, starting with small residential projects and expanding into commercial developments across 3 states. Patterson Construction was worth an estimated $50 million, and Rick never let anyone forget it. He owned the biggest house, drove the most expensive cars, and treated family gatherings like board meetings where he held court and dispensed judgment on everyone else's life choices. I was his favorite target. Sarah's still playing with computers for the government, he'd announced at last year's reunion, causing the entire deck to erupt in laughter. Must be nice having job security, even if the pay is terrible. What made it worse was that the rest of the family went along with it. Dad, Rick's younger brother, had spent his career in middle management and had always lived in Rick's shadow. My cousins, Rick's kids, had all joined the family business and were doing well financially, but they seemed to inherit their father's need to put others down to feel important. This year I'd almost declined the invitation entirely. But something had changed in my work life recently, something that made me curious about how this year's reunion might unfold. For the past 6 months, I'd been leading a joint task force investigating a complex money laundering operation involving construction companies, shell corporations, and offshore banking. The case, codenamed Foundation, had started with suspicious banking patterns and evolved into a massive investigation spanning multiple states and involving dozens of businesses. We were close to making arrests. I arrived at Uncle Rick's house Saturday afternoon, driving my modest Honda Civic and carrying the same worn duffel bag I'd been using for family trips since college. Rick was holding court by the pool, entertaining a group of relatives with stories about his latest business acquisition. "Sarah," he called out when he spotted me. "There's our little government bureaucrat. Still pushing papers and living off taxpayer money." The group chuckled appreciatively. I smiled and waved, then went inside to greet other family members and avoid the inevitable interrogation about my career choices. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Throughout the afternoon and evening, Rick made sure to include me in conversations just long enough to make some dismissive comment about government work, public sector salaries, or my apparent lack of ambition. Each comment was designed to position himself as the successful entrepreneur and me as the underachieving relative who'd chosen security over success. "Sarah could have done something real with her finance degree," he told a group of cousins during dinner. "Instead, she's counting beans for Uncle Sam." "At least she has benefits," my cousin Jake laughed. "Can't get fired from a government job, right?" "True," Rick agreed. "Though I suppose when you're not contributing anything meaningful to society, job security is all you've got." I ate my barbecue and smiled politely, letting the familiar sting of their dismissal wash over me. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that I'd spent the morning reviewing surveillance footage of Rick's construction sites, bank records showing suspicious cash deposits, and wire transfer patterns that painted a very clear picture of systematic tax evasion and money laundering. Rick Patterson wasn't just a successful businessman. He was the centerpiece of our investigation. Sunday morning brought the traditional family softball game, followed by the annual career updates session where everyone shared their professional accomplishments from the past year. It was Rick's favorite tradition, since it gave him a platform to announce new contracts, property acquisitions, and business expansions while everyone else offered more modest updates. We gathered on the deck overlooking the lake, mimosas and coffee in hand, while Rick prepared to hold court. "All right, everyone," he began, standing at the head of the group like a CEO addressing shareholders. Time for our annual check-in. Let's see what the Patterson family has accomplished this year. He started with his own updates, naturally. Patterson Construction had landed a $15 million municipal contract. They'd opened a new office in Albany. Revenue was up 40% from the previous year. Not bad for a guy who started with a pickup truck and a toolbox 30 years ago, he concluded to appreciative applause. My cousins followed with their updates. Jake had been promoted to project manager. Lisa had successfully bid on several new developments. Mark had expanded the company's equipment leasing division. When it came to my turn, the deck went quiet with anticipation. This was always the moment when Rick would find some way to diminish whatever I shared. Well, I began, it's been an interesting year. I got a promotion to senior special agent level, which was nice. Senior special agent, Rick repeated with amusement. Sounds very official. What does a senior special agent do that a regular special agent doesn't? Mostly leadership responsibilities. Managing task forces, coordinating with other agencies, overseeing complex investigations. Complex investigations, he laughed. Like what, tracking down people who fudged their tax returns? The group chuckled and I could see family members exchanging glances that said, here we go again. You'll never amount to anything, Rick continued, his voice getting louder and more theatrical. Still working that little government job? Everyone laughed and I could see the familiar dynamic playing out. Rick was performing for his audience, establishing his dominance over the family disappointment. I mean, Sarah, he continued, when are you going to stop playing games and do something real with your life? You're 34 years old. You could have been running your own business by now, making real money, building something meaningful. The laughter had died down, but I could see heads nodding in agreement. Even Dad was staying silent, unwilling to challenge his older brother's assessment. Government work is fine for people who want to coast, Rick went on, really warming to his theme now. But you were always one of the smart ones. You could have been something important. I stood up slowly, setting down my mimosa glass. You know what, Uncle Rick? You're absolutely right. He looked surprised by my agreement, clearly expecting more resistance. I should stop playing games, I continued. I should do something meaningful. Excuse me for just a moment. I walked into the house, leaving behind a deck full of confused relatives. In the bathroom, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my task force coordinator. Proceed with the operation. I'm on site and ready. The response came back immediately. Units are in position. Give us 5 minutes. I waited exactly 5 minutes, then walked back outside to the deck where my family was still gathered, now discussing my strange behavior. Sorry about that, I said, retaking my seat. Where were we? We were discussing your career choices, Rick said with renewed confidence. I think you were about to acknowledge that government work isn't exactly a path to success. Actually, Uncle Rick, I wanted to ask you about your success. Patterson Construction has done remarkably well recently. His chest puffed with pride. 40% revenue growth this year alone. That's impressive. A lot of cash flow for a construction company. Cash is king in this business, Sarah. You'd understand if you worked in the real world. I'm curious about something, I continued conversationally. Do you handle all that cash through traditional banking channels? Rick's smile faltered slightly. What kind of question is that? Oh, just professional curiosity. In my little government job, I see a lot of businesses struggling with cash management, regulatory compliance, that sort of thing. We handle our finances perfectly legally, he said, his voice taking on a defensive edge. I'm sure you do. Though I have to say, some of the cash deposit patterns I've seen in construction companies can look unusual to untrained eyes. The deck had gone quiet. Family members were looking back and forth between us, sensing tension but not understanding the source. Sarah, Dad said nervously, maybe we should change the subject. Actually, Dad, I think this is a perfect time to share some exciting news about my work. I stood up again, and this time I could see 3 figures in dark suits walking around the side of the house toward the deck. You see, Uncle Rick, you're right that I've been working a little government job. But you might be interested to know that my little job involves investigating financial crimes. Money laundering, tax evasion, that sort of thing. Rick's face had gone pale. What are you talking about? I'm talking about Operation Foundation, A 6-month investigation into a money laundering network involving construction companies in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The 3 FBI agents had reached the deck now, and I could see family members noticing them with growing alarm. "Rick Patterson?" said Agent Martinez, the task force leader, stepping forward with his badge visible. "Yes." Rick's voice was barely a whisper. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, tax evasion, and wire fraud." The deck erupted in shocked exclamations as Agent Martinez began reading Rick his rights. Agent Chin moved to secure the perimeter while Agent Rodriguez coordinated with local law enforcement units that were arriving to search the property. "This is a mistake," Rick said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sarah, tell them this is a mistake." I looked at him calmly. "Uncle Rick, for 6 months my task force has been tracking cash deposits, wire transfers, and banking patterns associated with Patterson Construction. We've documented systematic underreporting of income, use of shell companies to hide assets, and coordination with other businesses to launder money through construction projects." The family was staring at me in complete shock. Dad looked like he might faint. He whispered. "You've been investigating Rick?" "I've been investigating a criminal enterprise," I corrected. The fact that it involved Uncle Rick was professionally awkward. "How long have you known?" Rick asked as Agent Martinez secured handcuffs around his wrists. "Known that you were involved?" "About 3 months. But I recused myself from the direct investigation at that point and let my team handle the evidence gathering." 3 months. Mom gasped. "You've known for 3 months and still came to family gatherings?" "My job is to investigate financial crimes, not to warn criminals that they're under investigation," I said simply. "That would be obstruction of justice." As the agents led Rick away, he turned back to look at me. "This isn't over, Sarah. I'll fight this." "Uncle Rick," I said quietly, "we have 18 months of financial records, surveillance footage, recorded conversations with your co-conspirators, and documentation of $12 million in unreported income. The case is actually very much over." The next few hours were a blur of activity. FBI teams searched the house and grounds while family members sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. Several relatives left immediately, not wanting to be associated with the scene. Others stayed and peppered me with questions I mostly couldn't answer due to the ongoing investigation. Dad pulled me aside as the search teams were finishing up. "Sarah, I need to understand what just happened." "What happened is that Uncle Rick has been running a criminal enterprise for years and finally got caught." "But you're FBI?" "Senior Special Agent, Financial Crimes Division. I specialize in white-collar criminal investigations." "For how long?" 8 years. Since I graduated from Georgetown." Dad sat down heavily on a deck chair. 8 years. We've been making fun of your government job for 8 years and you're actually what, Dad?" "Actually someone important. Someone who matters." I looked at my father, this man who had spent my entire adult life apologizing for my career choices, making excuses for my lack of traditional success, and enabling his brother's constant criticism. "Dad, I've always been important. I've always mattered. My job has always been meaningful. The fact that Uncle Rick couldn't see past his own prejudices about government work doesn't change that." "But we didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked. When I told you I worked in financial investigations, you assumed that meant something boring and unimportant. When I said I specialized in white-collar crime, you tuned out because it wasn't as exciting as construction contracts." Dad was quiet for a long moment. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now Uncle Rick goes through the legal system. He'll be charged, probably tried, and if convicted, sentenced according to federal guidelines for financial crimes." "What about the family business?" "That depends on how deeply the other employees were involved. If Jake and Lisa and Mark were just employees who didn't know about the illegal activities, they might be able to continue operating legitimately. If they were active participants..." I shrugged. "How much trouble is Rick in?" I thought about the evidence we'd compiled. Bank records showing $12 million in unreported income. Shell companies used to hide assets. Coordination with other businesses to launder money through fake construction projects. Bribery of municipal officials to secure contracts. A lot of trouble, Dad. Federal sentencing guidelines for money laundering and tax evasion are severe, especially when the amounts are this large. As I drove home that evening, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts from family members. Some wanted details about the investigation. Some wanted to know if they were in legal jeopardy. Some just wanted to express shock and confusion about the day's events. I ignored most of them. Tomorrow, I'd return to work and continue building cases against other financial criminals. Tonight, I just wanted to process what had happened and what it meant for my family relationships going forward. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 8 years, Uncle Rick had dismissed my career as meaningless government work. He'd positioned himself as the family success story while treating me like an underachiever who'd chosen security over ambition. It turned out that my meaningless government work had been building a case that would likely send him to federal prison for several years and destroy the business empire he was so proud of. As I pulled into my apartment complex, I thought about next year's family reunion. Assuming there was one, it would certainly be different. Uncle Rick would probably be in federal prison. The family business might not exist. And everyone would finally understand what a senior special agent actually does for a living. Sometimes justice takes time. But when it arrives completely. 3 months later, I received a call from Dad. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that Rick took a plea deal." "I know, Dad." I was briefed on the terms. 18 months in federal prison, full restitution, forfeiture of assets. It was a good deal for him. Given the evidence, he could have gotten much longer. The business is shutting down. Jake and Lisa are looking for new jobs. I felt a pang of sympathy for my cousins, who had genuinely seemed unaware of their father's criminal activities. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you proud of me now?" There was a long silence on the other end. "Sarah, I was always proud of you. I never understood what you were doing. I thought success had to look like Rick's success. I thought building wealth was the only thing that mattered. And now I realize that what you do, protecting people from criminals, making sure the system works fairly, that's actually more important than anything Rick ever built." It was a start. "Dad, next year if there's a family reunion, maybe we can talk about something other than career achievements." "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd really like that." As I hung up the phone, I thought about the inscription on the FBI seal. Fidelity, bravery, integrity. For 8 years, I'd lived those values while my family dismissed my work as unimportant. But values don't become less important just because other people don't understand them. And sometimes, living those values means standing up to people you love, even when it costs you. Even when it costs them everything.